Welcome, I'm Kimberly Seswick. I'm the Senior Interpretive Specialist at Harriet Tubman National Historical Park. Today I'm in Fort Hill Cemetery and I'm standing next to the gravesite of Harriet Tubman. It's here that she, as a suffragist, and other famous suffragists such as Martha Coffin Wright, Frances Seward, Eliza Osborne are all buried here. But I think I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit, because when we think of Harriet Tubman, we don't necessarily think of her as a suffragist. We think of her as someone on the Underground Railroad who was ferrying people from Maryland all the way to Canada. We think about her work during the Civil War as a soldier, a nurse, a spy, a scout, but not as a suffragist. So let me step back just a little bit. She's born in Maryland in 1822. She is born enslaved, the fifth of 9 children. At the ripe old age of 6, she will start to be leased out to other masters. If she does anything wrong, she'll be whipped. Those scars that she receives from these whippings, she'll carry the rest of her life. When she gets sick, she's sent home to her mother, who brings her back to health, and she's leased out again. She witnesses the trauma of the sale of 3 of her sisters who were sold south to the cotton plantations. She remembers the cries of her sisters. She remembers the grief that her parents go through losing those children. At 12, she's hit in the head by a 2-pound counterweight, which crushes in her skull and causes what we think today is temporal lobe epilepsy. With that, she's going to get violent headaches. She's going to develop a sleeping illness. And when she sleeps, she has very vivid visions and dreams. And it's these visions and dreams that she believes it's her God speaking directly to her. She'll marry at the age of 22. She marries John Tubman, a free man. And at this point, she's going to go to her owner and say, "Let me lease myself out. And I'll pay you $60 a year. I'm going to save all the rest of my money, and when I have enough, I'm going to buy my freedom from you." And also at this time is when she's going to drop the initial name she was given of Araminta Ross. She drops Araminta, takes her mother's name Harriet, drops her maiden name Ross, and brings on Tubman. So from then on, she is Harriet Tubman. Her owner agrees to the arrangement, and that goes on for 5 years. But then the 49-year-old owner died. His widow found out that he had left the family deep in debt. So she says, "Don't worry, I know exactly what we're going to do. We're going to sell property." And Harriet finds out through the grapevine that it's she and 2 of her brothers who are going to be sold south to the cotton plantations. So this is Harriet's choice. Be sold south and never see her family again, just like her 3 sisters, or go north. Harriet chooses north and trying to get to freedom. So she self-emancipates. She takes her life in her own hands, and she makes it all the way to Philadelphia. In Philadelphia, she cannot believe what freedom is like. She gets her own job. She gets a place to stay. She's the master of her own life. But not long in Philadelphia, she starts to miss her family. And this is when she meets a man by the name of William Still. He's a very famous black abolitionist, and some call him the father of the Underground Railroad. He is part of the Vigilance Committee of the Pennsylvania Anti-Slavery Society. Through William Still, Harriet will get the money. She is going to get the means, the maps, and the connections to be able to navigate on the Underground Railroad, returning down to Maryland 13 times to bring up family and friends. Through William Still, Harriet Tubman is going to be introduced to Lucretia Mott. Now, Lucretia Mott is a white abolitionist living in Philadelphia. She is a Quaker, and she's a women's rights activist, a suffragist. And Lucretia Mott is going to politicize Harriet Tubman very early on. She will bring her to suffrage meetings as well as abolitionist meetings. And by 1858, Harriet is actually going to be inviting women into her boarding house room and talk to them about abolition and suffragists. So we have Harriet Tubman here as also the image of the suffragist movement. What Lucretia Mott believed, as others believed, was that the plight of white women at this time was very similar to that of enslaved women. So the image of a black woman being chained and bound is going to be the metaphor for all women in the United States. Lucretia Mott is going to introduce Harriet Tubman to her sister, Martha Coffin Wright. And Martha Coffin Wright lives right here in Auburn, New York. So I think maybe we should go up and visit her gravesite now as well. We're now standing at the gravesite of Martha Coffin Wright, the sister of Lucretia Mott. Now, Lucretia Mott and Martha Coffin Wright are two of the 5 women who start the Women's Rights Convention in Seneca Falls in 1848. So Martha, yes, is pro-women's rights as well as a suffragist, and she's an abolitionist. She opens her home as a site on the Underground Railroad. And Harriet Tubman is going to work very closely with Martha Coffin Wright as she brings people up through Auburn to Canada. Also, Martha Coffin Wright is going to continue that politicization of Harriet Tubman as she gets more involved with the suffrage movement. By 1860, she's doing one of her public talks, her first public talk about suffrage. Martha Coffin Wright is going to introduce Harriet Tubman to another Auburian, and that is William Seward. William Seward, by the time Harriet Tubman meets him, is the U.S. Senator from New York State. He will soon be Secretary of State under Abraham Lincoln and becomes a very close friend of Harriet Tubman. So from here, let's head over to the Seward gravesite. Now we're at the site of William Seward, and he lies next to his wife Frances. Now Frances is the true abolitionist in the family. William Seward's running for president against Abraham Lincoln, so he does not want to take a strong stance on suffrage or on abolition. But Frances does. She opens her house as a site on the Underground Railroad, welcoming many of those traveling through Auburn on the way to Canada. Harriet Tubman will continue to be introduced to those in the suffrage and abolitionist movements. Now, the war is almost coming. 1861, Civil War starts. It's 1859, and Frances is going to sell a plot of land, 7-acre farm, here on the edge of Auburn in Fleming, New York, to Harriet Tubman. This is in direct violation of the 1850 Fugitive Slave Act. And so the Sewards should have been thrown in jail for up to 6 months and fined $1,000, but it never happens. William Seward is so high in the government at this time, they just turn a blind eye. So here is Harriet Tubman in 1859, a landowner. This is where she will live in freedom for 50 years. But she doesn't settle there quite right away. What she does is she actually goes up to Canada as the war is imminent, brings her family down, her parents, and gets them settled in the farm. She turns to her wealthy friends, such as the Sewards and the Osborns, and gets their promise that they will look after her family while she goes off and fights in the war. When she returns, not much has been done on the farm. So for about 15 years, we don't have a lot of information on what Harriet Tubman is doing, except getting the farm up and running. She has a large vegetable garden, and she sells her produce up and down South Street to the different houses. She'll work for many of the wealthy families in town as a domestic, and on her property, they make bricks and sell to those that are building homes in the area. When we get to about the 1880s, Harriet is now getting very active back into the women's rights movement. After the war, 1869, we have a lot of the Southern women not believing in equality and fighting against giving Black women the right to vote. This causes a schism in the women's rights movement. And whenever Harriet Tubman was asked, which of the two movements are you a part of, she always says, I'm a part of Susan B. Anthony's organization. So Harriet will go with Susan B. Anthony and others to many of the meetings and conventions, and most of the time she speaks. She speaks about her time in the war and her experiences. And again, many of the white women are relating to what Harriet Tubman is saying, that it should be equality for all. Harriet is very pointed when she's talking about why women should get the right to vote. At one point in many of these speeches, she will say, women were on the battlefield. They went out while the bullets were still being fired and tend to those men who needed help and bring them back and tended to their wounds and cared for them for many months before they were able to return home. Harriet's like, well, if they're able to do this, that's the same work as a man, so why shouldn't we get the vote as well? So Harriet Tubman makes the argument for suffrage based on her own life experiences. She is always short of money for the main reason that she has a very philanthropic mindset. So whenever she has money, she is going to make sure that that money goes to someone else in need. She opens her house here in Auburn to take in any of the sick, any that need food, clothing, or shelter, she brings them in. She takes care of family members. Her brother dies, she took in his widow and the children, and they stayed in the house. Harriet, to make sure that schools are being built for black children, she will actually have fundraisers here in Auburn, sending all the money down to the Freedmen's Bureau to make sure those schools are built. Harriet continues on the suffrage road, but because she is short of funds, many times she has to make do. Sometimes she sleeps in the railroad station, not even getting a place to stay. At one time when she was asked to speak in Boston, she sold a cow to have the money to get to Boston to speak. Many of her friends will help her in getting to these places as well as help in her philanthropic opportunities. But Harriet, bottom line, is the one who's trying to earn the money to get to these suffrage organizations, meetings, and conferences. And this is one of the reasons why so many of the historians don't count Harriet Tubman's work in the suffrage movement, because she can't necessarily get to some of the more important conventions and meetings. Harriet Tubman, though, continues to fight. At the ripe age of about 88 years old, she is going to be purchasing a 20-acre tract right next to her farm because she wants to make sure that those who are old and indigent in the black community have a place to go. With her herself getting older, she is very aware of the need to have a place for older people to go to. She buys the land. She tries to do enough fundraisers to raise the money to start the Tubman home for aged and indigent Negroes, but unfortunately never gets the money enough together to get it open. This is when she deeds the property to the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church, and they take the project on and open the house in 1908. Harriet Tubman will also, right about this time, help start an organization that is still in existence today with over 300,000 members, and that is the National Association of Colored Women. This is an answer to the white women's club movement that did not allow black women to join. And when you look at their inaugural meetings for both groups, white and black, they are looking at what they should do to better society. So yes, more schools, hospitals, nursing homes, but that's where the white women's organization kind of trails off. And you keep on reading, you can hear Harriet's voice at that inaugural meeting. They're talking about lynching and working against that. They're talking about the loophole in the 13th Amendment, and they're talking about Jim Crow laws, black codes, and convict leasing. They're talking about disenfranchisement in the general sense, not just in the vote, but to get rights for black people. And Harriet Tubman is supporting that organization throughout the rest of her life. Harriet Tubman will eventually, the last 2 years of her life, has to go into the Tubman home for aged and indigent Negroes. At this point, she is bedridden, but she's still very sharp. And when asked right before she died in March of 1913, if she had any last words, she said she was going on to another place to make a home for all of us. So to her, in her mind, her work was going to continue just in another location. I hope you all have the time to come visit Harriet Tubman National Historical Park. There's so much more to tell about this story and to show you if you come here. So please, hope you come to the park, and thank you.